They made me cook Thanksgiving for 40 people, then didn't save me a seat at the table. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room with the turkey roasting pan biting into my oven mitt hands, heat radiating up my arms, and I heard my aunt laugh and say, "Well, we didn't set one for Emily because she'll be running back and forth anyway." The dining room was loud in that holiday way, clinking glasses, forks scraping, someone's phone playing a video too loud. And the smell of gravy and browned butter was so thick it felt like it was stuck in my hair. I waited for someone to correct her. I waited for my mom to say, "Of course we did." Nobody did. My brother's wife, Talia, leaned over the place cards like she was checking a spreadsheet and said, without looking up, "We can squeeze in another chair, but it'll block the walkway." Then my brother just shrugged and said, "She can eat in the kitchen. She doesn't care." And that was the moment my stomach went hollow, like my body had decided it didn't want any of the food I'd spent 2 days making. My face stayed in place, polite, neutral, because that's the muscle memory you build when you've been trying to earn your spot in a room your whole life. I shifted my grip on the pan, felt the slickness of butter and drippings wobble, and stepped forward anyway. "Turkey's ready," I said, voice a little too bright. No one turned fully toward me. People made space the way you make space for a waiter, not a family member. My mom took the carving knife from the sideboard and said, "Perfect timing," like I was a timer that had gone off. I set the pan down, and my wrists throbbed as the weight left them. I stared at the table, 40-ish plates, matching napkins, little gold place cards with everyone's names written in my mom's careful handwriting. There was one that said kids table and another that said extra, but there was no Emily. My aunt met my eyes for half a second and gave me a small, satisfied smile, like she'd just proven a point. My chest got tight in a way that made my breath shallow. I wiped my hands on my apron even though they weren't dirty, just to have something to do, and said, very quietly, "So, where am I sitting?" It was supposed to be a redemption Thanksgiving, which sounds dramatic, but that's honestly how it felt in my head. I'm 29, I live 30 minutes away from my mom, and I've spent most of my adult life doing this weird dance where I'm technically included but functionally useful. My family loves traditions, which is code for don't ask why, just do it. I'm the one who can cook, so the cooking becomes my role. I'm the one who doesn't have kids yet, so I'm the one who can help. I'm the one who came home after my dad died to be closer, which somehow translated into available. I've heard my mom call me such a lifesaver more times than I've heard her ask, "How are you doing?" And I've told myself that being needed counts as being loved. It's an ugly thought when you say it out loud, but there it is. This year, my mom insisted we host 40 people because my Aunt Denise didn't want to split the family, and my mom can't tolerate anyone being disappointed in her. She called me 3 weeks ago and said, "I'm going to need you," like it was a normal thing to say to your daughter. I said yes because I always do. Then she added, "And don't worry, I'll make sure you actually get to sit down this year." Like that was a perk I'd earned. I laughed, even though last year I ate a plate standing at the counter while everyone else did the gratitude round at the table. I remember because my feet were aching and I kept nodding and smiling when people said things like, "I'm thankful for family," while not one of them noticed I was missing. I started cooking 2 days before. Wednesday night, I was in my apartment, chopping onions until my eyes burned, making the cranberry sauce in a pot that kept boiling over because my stove is cheap and temperamental. I packed everything into labeled containers like I was catering an event. Thursday morning, I drove to my mom's house at 6:30 a.m. with a trunk full of pies and casseroles, and the sky was still that flat gray blue. My mom was already in the kitchen in her holiday sweater, hair curled, talking fast. She kissed my cheek and said, "Thank God you're here," and handed me a list before I'd even set my bag down. From that moment until the turkey came out, I didn't stop moving. I peeled potatoes until my fingers wrinkled. I lifted trays in and out of the oven until my forearms felt sore. I stirred gravy while my aunt hovered and made little comments like, "You're using store broth?" and "We used to do it from scratch." I kept my voice light. I swallowed my irritation. I told myself, just get through it. Just make it nice. Then you'll sit down, and you'll be part of it, and you'll feel like a person again. Somewhere around noon, my brother Kyle arrived with Talia and their kids, carrying a store-bought charcuterie board like it was a trophy. Talia breezed into the kitchen, looked at my counters covered in flour and roasting pans, and said, "Oh my God, Emily, you're such a martyr," with a laugh like it was a compliment. Then she asked if I could quickly watch the kids while she got ready, because they're wound up. I did, because the kids were bouncing off the walls and I didn't want them to get yelled at. So I stood in the living room with a baby on my hip while the stuffing sat cooling too long, and I felt my stress ratchet tighter, and I still told myself it would be worth it when I sat down. Then we got to the moment with the place cards. When I asked, "Where am I sitting?" my mom blinked like she'd forgotten I had a body. "Honey," she said, using that sweet voice that means stop making things uncomfortable, "we'll figure it out in a second. Let's just get everyone served first." My Aunt Denise spoke up immediately, loud enough to carry. "Emily always eats in the kitchen anyway. She likes it. She can take a break later." She said it like she was being practical, like I was a coat you hang in the hallway. "I don't like it," I said, and it surprised me how flat my voice sounded. I could feel my face flushing. I could feel the room's attention shift toward me, that uncomfortable holiday pause where everyone wishes you'd just shut up so the vibe stays pleasant. Kyle frowned at me like I was being unreasonable. He said, half scolding, "It's one meal. Don't start." "Don't start what?" I asked. My hands were shaking now, and I tucked them into my apron pockets so no one could see. "I cooked all of this. I've been here since sunrise. And you didn't save me a seat." Talia made a small sigh and looked at the table like she was assessing a seating chart. "We assumed you'd just eat after," she said, "because you're always up anyway." My mom's cheeks went pink. She looked panicked, like she could see the whole evening turning into a story people would repeat. "Emily, please," she said quietly. "Not right now. Not right now. Not in front of people. Not when it makes us look bad." That's what she meant. I looked at the table again and noticed something I hadn't seen at first because I was trying so hard not to cry. There was an extra place setting, complete with a nice plate and a cloth napkin. It wasn't like they'd genuinely run out of space. They'd planned for a surprise guest and still hadn't planned for me. My throat tightened, and I had this brief, childish urge to just grab a plate and wedge myself into any spot and force them to deal with me. Instead, I did something calmer and somehow more final. I said, "Okay," and I untied my apron. My mom's eyes widened. "Emily," she whispered, warning. I folded the apron slowly, hands trembling, and set it on the counter like I was clocking out. The room around me kept moving. People taking seats, someone calling the kids to wash hands, Kyle helping his son into a booster. My aunt looked satisfied again, like she thought I was about to sulk in the kitchen and be quiet. I walked back into the kitchen, and the quiet back there hit me hard after the dining room noise. The sink was full of bowls. The counter was sticky from spilled cranberry. The air was warm and heavy, and my hairline was damp with sweat. I stood there for a second, breathing through the tightness in my chest, and then I opened the cabinet where my mom keeps the disposable foil containers. I started packing leftovers. Not in a petty, frantic way. In a methodical way. Turkey slices, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, a whole pie still in its dish. I labeled them with a marker because my brain clung to order when my emotions wanted to spill everywhere. I could hear laughter from the dining room, my aunt telling a story, someone pouring wine. Nobody came to check on me. That hurt more than the place card. When I was done, I carried the containers to my car in 2 trips. The cold air outside shocked my skin, and I realized I was still in my socks because I'd kicked my shoes off earlier in the kitchen. My feet stung from being on tile all day. I loaded the food into the trunk like I was stealing my own labor back. My mom finally appeared on the porch as I closed the trunk. She stepped down one stair, hands clasped, face pinched with stress. "Emily," she said, "what are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said. Her mouth opened. "You can't just, people are here." "I know," I said. My voice sounded steadier outside, in the cold. I cooked for 40 people and you didn't save me a seat. So I'm taking my food and I'm leaving. She looked like she might cry, and for a second I almost caved because I hate being the reason someone cries. But then I remembered her saying, "Not right now," and my chest hardened again. "Please," she whispered, "just come sit at the kitchen island. We'll bring you a plate." The kitchen island. The spot where I always stand. The spot that isn't a seat at the table. It was the same offer, just phrased nicer. "No," I said. "If I'm good enough to feed everyone, I'm good enough to sit with everyone." She flinched like I'd hit her. "You're making a scene," she said, voice tight, the fear turning into blame. "I'm not," I replied. "You did, when you decided I didn't need a chair." I got in my car with my hands shaking so hard I had to try the ignition twice. As I backed out, I saw my aunt's face in the window, watching. I saw Kyle step onto the porch, arms crossed. Nobody ran after me. Nobody said, "Wait, please." It was like I'd been right all along about my role. I drove to my friend Jenna's apartment because I didn't trust myself not to go home and collapse. Jenna opened the door in sweatpants, took one look at my face, and didn't ask for details. She just stepped aside and said, "Come in." I sat on her couch, still smelling like turkey and onion, and the moment the quiet hit me, I started crying so hard my ribs hurt. Jenna handed me a glass of water and said, "Tell me everything." And I did, in the messy, embarrassed way people tell stories when they still can't believe it happened. My phone buzzed all night. "Kyle, you're being ridiculous." "My mom, please answer." "My Aunt Denise, somehow, you owe your mother an apology for ruining the holiday." I didn't answer any of them. I stared at the ceiling in Jenna's guest room, listening to the distant sound of her neighbor's TV through the wall, and I felt this strange combination of grief and relief. Grief for the fantasy that cooking my way into belonging would ever work. Relief that I finally stopped auditioning. The next morning, my mom called again. I answered because I knew she'd keep trying until I did. Her voice was quiet, like she'd spent the night calming down. "I didn't realize," she said, and I could hear in her tone that she wanted that sentence to be enough. "You did realize," I said gently because I wasn't trying to destroy her. "Just be honest. You promised me a seat, and then you let it happen anyway." She was silent for a long time. Then she said, small, "I didn't want conflict." "I know," I said, "but you picked the conflict where I lose." We didn't solve everything in one call. Real life doesn't do that. But I told her I won't cook like that again. Not for 40 people. Not without being treated like a person. If that means we do potluck, fine. If that means I show up with a pie and leave early, fine. If that means I don't go at all, also fine. This year taught me something I hate admitting. Some families will take as much as you'll hand them, and they'll call it tradition so you feel guilty for noticing. Thanks for watching. If you've ever been made responsible for everyone's togetherness and then treated like you weren't part of it, share your story in the comments. I'd really like to hear it.